Hello everybody. Today I will be talking about Jordan Peterson. You will have heard about Jordan Peterson from any number of television shows, YouTubes, hand-wringing analysis articles from sensible liberals. What are we going to do? The Jordan Peterson problem, and so on. I'm not sure how to introduce him, so I'm just going to say the first lines that I found on Wikipedia, which you can do too, but you won't be getting my lovely accent. Here we go. Sorry. Jordan burnt. That must be a mistake. It's hardly his middle name. Oh, it's Jordan B. Peterson. Maybe it is his middle name. Anyway, Jordan Burnt Peterson, born June 12, 1962, is a Canadian clinical psychologist, public intellectual, and professor of psychology at the University of Toronto. His main areas of studies are in abnormal, social, and personality psychology, with a particular interest in the psychology of religious and ideological belief, and the assessment and improvement of personality and performance. In 2016, Peterson released a series of videos on his YouTube channel in which he criticised political correctness and the Canadian government's Bill C-16. He subsequently received significant media coverage. Now that's just the 2 bits of Wikipedia, which we'll do as an intro for who this guy is. He is a Canadian psychologist. And how I found him first is nothing to do with the Bill C-16. It was his YouTubes, which I found very interesting because I hadn't done any research on him at all. He has 2-hour-long psychology lectures where he takes stories and movies, Disney movies, and he scans them for Jungian archetypes. And he explains these Jungian archetypes to his class. And it's very interesting. And then he does the same thing to the Bible. He takes old Genesis stories and scans them for Jungian archetypes. And I would watch hours and hours of these things because I find it very interesting, and I think he does a very good job of it. He's very good at that, and everything he says about those things, I mean most of the things he says when he's not going off message, is valid and interesting, and what you would expect from a college lecture. He approached the Canadian government and gave testimony when the Canadian government was arguing about this thing called Bill C-16, which, among other things, seemed to make it illegal to not use certain pronouns, which sounds ridiculous. And Jordan Peterson also felt it was ridiculous for the same reasons that I do, in that it's not a good thing for a government to insist that people use certain words for anything. Now, I don't think he has any problem with trans people per se, but he definitely has a problem with what he regards as being forced to use words. Yeah, pretty much. Which is different to being forced to not use certain words, I think, was his point. I don't know if it's that different, but people would say, well, how come you don't use that word people have for black people? You would never do that. And he said that there's a difference between the government forcing you to use certain words and your social environment putting a taboo on certain words, which I suppose is a point. Here is a standard Peterson quote, which he has a great habit of going straight from reasonable to bonkers in one sentence. Here we go. I will never use words I hate. Like, just imagine like Kermit the Frog is saying this, and it'll sound just like Jordan Peterson. I will never use words I hate, like the trendy and artificially... Will I do it? Will I do the Kermit the Frog? I will never... I had a bit more gravelling. I will never use words I hate. No, that's not Kermit, is it? I will never use words I hate, like the trendy and artificially constructed words je and jer. These words are at the vanguard of a postmodern radical leftist ideology. I cannot imagine Kermit saying the words postmodern radical leftist. Forget it. I'll just do the quote normally. I will never use words I hate, like the trendy and artificially constructed words je and jer. These words are at the vanguard of a postmodern radical leftist ideology that I detest, and which is, in my professional opinion, frighteningly similar to the Marxist doctrines that killed at least 100 million people in the 20th century. That's his quote, right? That's what he said. Now, I will never use words I hate. The first bit, that's fine. That sounds okay, doesn't it? Nobody wants to use words that they hate. And he says, like the trendy and artificially constructed words je and jer, meaning I suppose, people who are gendered, they're gendered, they don't want to be him and her. So instead, they decided to be somewhere else on the gender line. And they've made up where they want to be on the gender line. And they've also made up the words that they would like other people to use to refer to these places on the gender line where they feel that they are. By the way, I have no problem with people being gendered any way they want. Good for you. But don't tell me what to do, right? Don't tell me how to talk about it. Don't tell me how to deal with it or anything. In the same way I won't tell you how to talk about me. Like, I wrote a post on a blog once given out about the word cis, C-I-S, which means normal in the regular sense of normal, meaning most people would identify with, they wouldn't really think about it that much. Like, if you're born as a man, you're kind of a man. And if you're born as a woman, you're kind of a woman. And there's a minority of people for whom that is not true. And they just don't recognize that connection. And that's fine. You know, that's their own business. It's nothing to do with me. Good luck to them. But they call people like me cis. And when I was... Oh, by the way, I didn't slam them or anything. I just said I don't like this word because it seems like they started off... They don't like the word... They don't like other people saying normal. Because they think normal is kind of a marginalising thing to do, and they think it's loaded with all this judgment. So let's say it is. I don't know, I don't think it is, but let's say it is. Then they started using words like heteronormative, which is basically a big long word that means normal. And not normal like morally or anything, more normal in the statistical sense of normal. You know? Like, there's no judgment attached to that, from my point of view, in this particular podcast. I'm not using it in a judgmental fashion. By God, I can be judgmental, but I'm not being judgmental now. I just mean normal in a statistical sense. And they then, heteronormative took over from normal, and they felt that it took all the baggage over with it, so now they use the word cis, which is just a short word for normal. I don't know. It seems odd to try and tell me, and my entire exposure to the word cis, this which they invented, is people telling me, die cis scum. It was just all abuse. And it doesn't... I mean, it shouldn't be too unreasonable to understand why somebody would not want to use a word they've just heard for themselves when it's only being used in a pejorative, abusive way towards them. I mean, that to me is entirely a reasonable thing. I'm not using your stupid word, no. But I'll vote in favour of whatever you people need, whatever trans people need. I'll vote in favour of that. I'll vote in favour of gender, queer, whatever they want to do. I'll always be in favour of them. Just don't tell me what to do. I'm not against gendered... What do they call themselves? Gender fluid people who are moving up and down the gender ladder wherever they want. I think that's fine. Good for you. I have no problem with that at all. As long as you don't tell me what to do. Because that's where I draw the line. So if you say, oh, you have to use, when you're talking to me, like, oh my God, I saw this sign outside some demonstration in a college and it said, ask for pronouns. In other words, you're supposed to ask every person you come across which pronouns to use. And I can't think of anything more insulting to, like, some girls have a boyish look to them and some boys have a girlish look to them, and I'd say there's a minority of those people who would regard it as a positive thing to ask them which pronoun. Can you imagine if some girl is boyish looking, but she's girly as hell, but she's a bit boyish looking, like she's a bit, looks like she climbs trees, if you know what I mean, but she's not remotely gender fluid, and she's had to put up with this all her life, and some guy called Barry goes up to her and says, hi, can you just tell me what pronouns I should use with you, please? Can you imagine how insulting that would be to her? How insensitive that I just loaded all my crap onto her. No, forget that, man. I'm not asking anybody for pronouns. So I agree with Jordan Peterson there. He goes on to say, in that same quote, these words are at the vanguard of a postmodern, radical leftist ideology that I detest. Right, that's the next bit. I don't know if they are. It's certainly postmodern, the idea that you get to create your own identity and everybody else has to deal with it. That's postmodern, because postmodernism doesn't really like the idea of a reality that we'd all have because reality is basically a set of assumptions we all share at some level. Now, whether or not those assumptions are true or not is kind of separate. But postmodernism goes one step beyond and says everybody has their own thing, and it's just as valid as anybody else's, which is clearly not true. Because we do have this, otherwise we'd never be able to contact each other. We wouldn't be able to talk to each other if we were operating completely on a different set of assumptions. Or is it just a coincidence, according to the postmodernists, that we all seem to be on roughly the same page, and we only disagree about certain things ideologically, or when it comes to our rights being threatened? I don't know. But yeah, making up words and pretending like it's just as valid as everything else is indeed postmodern. A vanguard of a postmodern radical leftist ideology. I don't know if genderqueer stuff, gender fluid politics is necessarily radical leftist, although I'm sure it can be. But I'm sure there's plenty of right-wing guys who woke up one morning and realised they were girls. There must be conservative, I mean I know there is conservative girls who woke up one morning and decided they were men. So I don't think it's necessarily leftist. And I know postmodernism isn't leftist. Postmodernism is just how you define your reality and how you relate to it, and how you relate to the reality of others. It's nothing to do with leftism or rightism or anything. So he thinks that these pronouns, these invented pronouns of the vanguard of a postmodern and radical leftist ideology that I detest, which is, in my professional opinion, frighteningly similar to the Marxist doctrines that killed at least 100 million people in the 20th century. Now, he says my professional opinion. His profession is clinical psychologist. Now, I'm not sure what that profession has to do with how Marxist doctrines have killed 100 million people in the 20th century. That seems a very odd thing to say, which is in my professional opinion. Like, unless he's really postmodernist and he's psychoanalyzing a time period rather than a person. Well, in that case, you're an expert in everything. And I think Jordan Peterson does believe himself to be an expert in everything, maybe for that reason, because he's deeply postmodernist in a way he would not accept. That's his own business. I don't care. Professional opinion. No, that's not your professional. That's just his opinion. I suppose it doesn't carry as much weight when you say, which is in my opinion. Maybe he just put the word professional in to give it a bit of weight. Maybe he doesn't mean it. I don't know. Frighteningly similar to the Marxist doctrines that killed at least 100 million people in the 20th century. Now, whatever you say, I don't like being told how to speak. I don't like being told what to do or how to say, and I don't like using words like j'ai and je, and I never will, because I think they're stupid. But to compare that to the murder of 100 million people is ludicrous. It's just ludicrous. As if it was the thin end of the wedge. It's ludicrous. And you get a lot of this in people critical of Marxism, mainly right-wing conservative capitalists. They'll say things like, how could you... Like, I'd lean much more towards Marx than I would Capital. Mr. Karl Capital, whoever developed that. But I hear that a lot. Just from people who just fire it at you. Marxism killed 100 million people. Therefore you're supporting a murderous doctrine, they say to me. And it's very simple to outline a number of scenarios using the assumptions, the same assumptions that were used in putting together this 100 million people number, by the way, which I do not contest. I have put very little research into it because it's not interesting to my point, but I have no interest in contesting 100 million people dead by Marxism. I know Stalinist Russia was responsible for millions of dead people, so I'm not going to bother contesting it, because that's not interesting. And Maoism in China. I could work out a way to try and explain that, but let's not bother. Let's just assume that that's all fine. And using those assumptions, that were the same assumptions that were put together to get this 100 million dead people figure, it's very easy to show that capitalism has killed far more people. And if you use the same assumptions and do the same maths that the people critical of Marxism have, depending on how you do it, you get a number somewhere between 200 million and a billion people who've been dead, either directly or indirectly as a result of capitalism. Now, of course, capitalists reject that completely. They just don't understand. Because we're living in a capitalist society, it's very difficult to describe the outside of a box that you're inside. It's very difficult to tell somebody else what the colour of the box that you're inside is. What's the colour of the box? You know, when you live inside it. It's very difficult. It can be done. You know, you need a ladder and a different set of eyes, but it can be done. So this sounds like ludicrous, of course, to people when you say capitalism has killed hundreds of millions of people, much more than communism has. And they say, well, how is that possible? You just go, well, there's been wars that have been fought for no other reason than the acquisition of wealth, of private wealth, and so on and so forth. And then there's other things, like there's policies undertaken by governments. For instance, a lot of right-wing conservative-leaning governments will deny public health care, and it's not easy, but it can be done. You can have a guess at how many people died as a result of not having proper health care available, and so on and so forth. And you go to a figure that's much higher than that. And anytime I've done it, and I've done it to a number of people who've hit to me, there's 100 million people, I said, well, it's not nearly as enough as capitalism. And say, how do you say that? And I give them the numbers, and I give them the logic of the numbers, and the assumptions underlying where I got the numbers from. And I wait for them to question the assumptions, because they're the same assumptions that they came up with their number, but they've put zero effort into criticizing that. Because, of course, we have much greater standards of evidence for information that contradicts some view we've preordained than for information which backs up our view, for which we have almost no standards of evidence whatsoever. Any information at all that comes in that backs up a view we already have, then you're not going to bother questioning it. I have the opposite. I'm not going to question. I have the opposite problem, and you have to really work at it. Like when they say that Marxism has killed 100 million people, I'm not going to spend any time questioning that. Which, if I had some sort of cognitive bias, I suppose would be something I'd be interested in doing. But you can get into these conversations. Well, the point is, it's a soundbite. Marxist doctrines have killed at least 100 million people. And this guy has described this popular soundbite, which is almost entirely a notional thing, arbitrary, as his professional opinion. And that's standard Jordan Peterson. And he gives the impression that he's read the literature. Sometimes he says that I've read all the literature on this. He gives the impression that he's a very thoughtful man, and he, you know, I guess he is. But he gives the impression that he's put so much thought into these opinions he comes out with. And it seems very strange to me that, like, you could almost say that's Jordan Peterson's entire personality, carefully considering and thinking long and hard to come to the same conclusions that reactionary right-wing bigots come to in seconds. And is that peculiar? Is that interesting? I don't know. That's how he came to prominence first, because of what he said to the Canadian government about being forced to use words. Now, a lot more people noticed him. He pinged on the radar again when he did an interview with Cathy Newman on the BBC on British television. And, well, the general impression is that it became infamous for her ostensibly aggressive style and inability to quite grasp what he was trying to say. And of course this suits him again, because he likes to think of himself as a very thoughtful intellectual, and that others might find it difficult to grasp what he's trying to say. Cathy Newman, I mean, she every so often he'd say something, and it was so vague that you would have to say, "Are you saying this?" And she said it so often that it was parodied as if it was a bad thing. And he'd say, "No, no, 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 no." And for a man who hates postmodernists, he doesn't seem to speak in a terribly clear fashion. My wife made the mistake of talking about Jordan Peterson's interview with Cathy Newman. And I just delivered a whole thing at her. In reality, of course, the interview went viral because Jordan Peterson has a fan club of people who are acutely sensitive, which is boringly predictable in any group which criticises others for being sensitive. And they seem unfamiliar with the established British adversarial style of interviewing people. So I just put a thing up and I said, look, if you take nothing else from this nothing of an issue, be assured that we would never have heard of this interview if the Jordan Peterson fan club were not so sensitive and easily offended. And by the way, if you think Jordan Peterson got a rough ride, I will let you Google Jeremy Paxman or John Humphreys in your own time. John Humphreys, a man whose interviewing style is so rough that they had to haul him in front of the government to explain himself. So yeah. And, so my wife mentioned this to me. I was kind of not going to talk about it because when I start talking about these things, I launch off. And she said, well, I said, you know, the more I think about it, the more I get the impression that I could absolutely shred Jordan Peterson in an interview. And I see people interviewing him, and they don't really shred him. It seems to be a thing about interviewers these days. They don't seem to say the obvious thing that would unsettle the whole boat. But I don't know. I'd shred him. I mean, not that I want to, because I do like him. I know it sounds like I don't, but I do. I like the guy. I mean, not that I'd want to shred him, but it would be easy enough. And my wife said, well, how would you go about that? And I said, well, I'm reading this from the tweet I sent her. Well, his conception of religion is extremely disingenuous, but he keeps pushing it. He rejects everything he doesn't like as left-wing. He thinks free market capitalism is the best way to distribute goods and services. And he's defined success in terms of income. He's defined intelligence in terms of a self-administered arbitrary shit circus that's basically a fortune cookie that costs more. And he claims that postmodernism is the most evil thing cooked up by the leftists, when he spends way too much time banging on about dominance hierarchies and how different people have different realities. Meanwhile, the right-wingers in the US have given us Donald Trump, and what is surely the most postmodern concept in modern history, alternative facts. I would rip all that to shreds. Yes, that is an actual text message that I sent my wife, in case you're wondering. That's what happens. She has to read walls of text from me on a regular basis. And then she said, he's psychological-centric, by which I assume she means that he interprets the entire world through his understanding of what psychology is. And I'm going to read again from another tweet I sent after this. I like the guy. Not a tweet, text message. I mean, I like the guy. But if I attracted an army of super-sensitive Twitter trolls, I'd have to re-examine everything I was doing. The rule of philosophy is, anytime you see a mob forming, run in the opposite direction. He seems to be doing nothing at all to discourage this cult built up around him. It's an abrogation of responsibility for someone who's always going on about how we all need to be more responsible. Postmodernism has lost the run of itself, for sure, but he would reject even the useful earlier brand of postmodernism. Postmodernism was an attempt to challenge the grand narratives of modernism, but Peterson's all about grand narratives. Man's role in society, woman's role in society, the family is the basic structural unit, capitalism is the great leveller of opportunity. It's so deeply conservative that some of his students have never heard of it before. It's that old-fashioned. And all the while he honestly believes that he has the scientific research to back it up. It's a messy confluence of delusions and confirmation bias, which is a shame because when he sticks to what he knows, he's a genius. His Freudian, by which I mean in the style of Freud and not sexual, analysis of myths and religions is genuinely inspiring. And again, I can confirm that is an actual message I sent my wife. And you can send her your consolation messages on Twitter. She's on Twitter if you want. If you want to say, you poor woman, how do you put up with it? Yeah. At some point, we're going to have to stop pretending to be shocked that Jordan Peterson is an old-school right-wing Christian conservative. Because once you understand that he's an old-school right-wing Christian conservative, or an updated version of it, all the hand-wringing analysis is obviated, it all just goes away and everything starts slotting into place, everything makes sense. When he says he hates postmodernism because it's evil or left-wing, well of course he does. He doesn't criticise it for the same reasons that I do. He criticises it because it challenges the grand narratives of the 19th century, or the 20th century I suppose. Whatever you call the 1800s. The 19th century, yeah. Sometimes you get this reaction from progressive thinkers. If you see people criticising him, they're confused because he's so old-fashioned. Yeah, Jordan, fuck postmodernism. What a complete... Wait, no, which? Whoa, what? And then they listen to the end of the sentence. They're like, whoa, where are you going with this? This is because progressive thinkers tend not to be right-wing Christian conservatives like he is. And when he cites studies, and he does this all the time, when he cites studies to back up his very flimsy opinions, well, of course he does. Everyone believes they have facts to back up their shitty opinions. Why should he be any different? It's more obvious when he starts a lecture with something like, and I've heard him do this, we're going to use IQ to measure intelligence. If you don't accept IQ as a measure of intelligence, you might as well not accept anything in psychology, because he thinks IQ is one of the more accurate, and it's not. It's just... Of course to him intelligence is an objectively measurable, immutable thing. That's the 19th century grand narrative of intelligence. And any challenge to that is postmodernism or Marxism or evil or just wrong. And of course, we know now that IQ tests don't necessarily... I mean, they're not necessarily a good measure of intelligence at all. They're a very good measure of how good you are doing IQ tests. It's been established that people from... like, black people do worse in IQ tests than white people. Black people who you'd expect to be at the same level and who are getting the same kind of education. Does that mean black people are stupider? No, it doesn't. It means there's something wrong with the test, right? His ideas, Peterson's ideas, are so old-fashioned and so out of step with modern values that, very much like Sci-10 Bruggencate, those debating him have no idea how to respond. It's like trying to argue against someone who literally believes in Plato's forms. And also like Sci-10, he seems to believe that a complete inability to do the mental twists necessary to consider his atavistic arguments in their own terms means his arguments are superior. He does, Sci-10 does that as well. There's a guy called Sci-10 Bruggencate. He's a Christian presuppositionalist. And he goes on debates with atheists. And, I mean, I call them debates, but usually in a debate you have two people defending their own point of view. Sci-10 goes in there refusing to explain any of his points of view. His whole debating tactic is, how do you know anything? How do you justify your set of assumptions? And his answer to that is, God told me, or something. I don't know. He thinks it comes from religion, from his God, but he doesn't justify that because he doesn't feel he has to. But he expects other people to justify where they get their morality from. And then it gets to the point where, I mean, he's a troll because he says things that he knows are bullshit just because he knows it annoys atheists. He says things like, the only way you can have any laws of logic or reason is by borrowing from my worldview, the fundamentalist Christian worldview, which is so disordered as a thought. I don't know. But that debating tactic is so outside what you would consider normal thoughts that it's very difficult to argue against it, because you have to basically switch off entire chunks of your brain to do the minimal necessary amount of thinking that you'd have to do in order to refute it. But then you've already switched, by that stage you see all your brain bits are switched off. So it's very difficult for clever people to deal with that argument. They're just like, what the hell are you talking about? What are you talking about? Like, you see that when he interviews people, you know. He says, yeah, but you're borrowing from my worldview. And they're like, what? What? And he just comes back, well, how do you know? Are you here today? Yeah, I am, yeah. How do you know? Well, I don't know. How do we know anything? You know? And Jordan Peterson's a bit like that. When he talks to people who have a better understanding of the things he's talking about, he is exposed then. I saw him on Bill Maher one night, and he was completely out of his depth when he wandered outside his knowledge base. The audience, the Bill Maher's audience, were openly laughing at his oversimplifications. People call him a pseudo-intellectual, which I think is unfair. Mainly because I think that calling anyone a pseudo-intellectual is unfair. I think the term intellectual is nebulous enough without the need to make it even more vague by adding prefixes that don't really help your understanding very much. If you're calling somebody a pseudo-intellectual, you probably mean an intellectual that I don't agree with. That's definitely my position on Jordan Peterson, but I don't think he's a pseudo-intellectual. I don't think anyone is. I don't think it's fair. I mean, I think he's an intellectual because he does respect the idea of being thoughtful and doing research, and he understands that reading books is very important. So that's enough for me. And I've seen the stuff he said about that are in his own wheelhouse, about the stories, about the Jungian archetypes and so on. Those are definitely intellectual. So I don't think it's fair to call him a pseudo-intellectual. He's just a guy. He's an intellectual, but I just disagree with him. Let's see. I have, in case you're wondering what I'm doing, I cut and paste sentences, like the Wikipedia bit I read at the start. I'm trying to figure out where I am in it. Here is a quote somebody else wrote about him. Now this is how you know Peterson is infecting people with it. For what it's worth, Peterson doesn't see himself as a conservative so much as a terrified traditionalist, which is in inverted commas, who generally believes in exercising caution over endorsing sweeping or radical cultural changes. Now, he doesn't see himself as a conservative, just a terrified traditionalist who generally believes in exercising caution over endorsing sweeping or radical cultural changes. That's pretty much textbook definition of conservative. Peterson doesn't seem as a conservative so much as a terrified... Like, what often would you call a conservative, but a terrified traditionalist who generally believes in exercising caution over endorsing sweeping or radical cultural changes. You might as well say I'm not a dog, I'm a canine quadruped that humans use for companionship and free labour. So sometimes, this is another Jordan Peterson thing, he denies he's a thing, and then he explains what he is, and that explanation more or less acts according to the dictionary definition of the original thing. Or he completely redefines a word to make it more or less appealing, like postmodernism, which seems analogous to Marxism in his lectures, and nowhere else. Or religion. The word religion, not the concept. He defines, I think it's a very disingenuous understanding of Christianity, religion in general and Christianity. He defines religion as, he doesn't define it as anything, but he has an understanding of religion in the sense that everybody puts their faith in something as a highest ideal to live by and actively venerates it. And that's what he thinks religion is. But then he talks about it, it's like a Mott and Bailey trick. He talks about it then as if it was the standard Christian understanding of religion. Like a Mott and Bailey argument is an argument where they get you to concede something and then carry on as if you've conceded the whole thing. Like when you're arguing with feminists sometimes and you're trying to explain where modern feminism is going wrong, they say, well, do you not think women should have the vote? And I say, yes, I do think women should have the vote. And then they'll say, do you not believe in equality for women? And I said, I absolutely believe in equality for women. And they say, well, then you're a feminist. Then you have to agree to all this other stuff. That's Mott and Bailey argumentation. And Jordan Peterson does the same thing when he talks about religion. He says religion has a very nebulous, abstract concept of religion that doesn't even mention a god. But then he carries on and talks about this religion that he's defined in one way. And he carries on using the same word to describe something that he is obviously defining in a completely different way. And that's disingenuous. But he does say things when he means other things. When he says success, he means money. When he says dominance hierarchy, he means power structure. When he says conscientiousness or conscientious, he means neurotic. When he says openness, he means nice. When he says all the data or all the documentation, he means some of the data. When he says chaos, he uses the word chaos a lot. When he says that, he just means the future. The future is unpredictable. So it's how are we going to guard against the chaos? The future is unpredictable. The future could be fine, but it's still chaos because it's unpredictable. That's what he means. When he says genius, he usually means just some guy he agrees with. When he says left-wing or Marxist, he just means bad. When he says postmodernist, he means communist or Marxist. When he says fact, and he does say this sometimes, he usually just means something I happen to believe. You can train yourself to mentally replace these terms with what he actually means by them, and then the more confusing of his statements will clear themselves up. I know he likes being dramatic. I mean, I do respect a sense of theatre in somebody. Why not? Sorry. Peterson, he does talk about the Nazis, fascism, and he thinks fascists and communists are pretty much the same thing. So, I don't know. That's his own business? I wouldn't. I would definitely lean hard left. He likes his personality test, which, as I've said before, is a fortune cookie. It costs more. All personality tests, by the way, are stupid. Because they can't tell you anything that you don't already know. And you can't put people into a series of little boxes and expect to do anything useful with that information. It's a waste of your time. The worst one, I don't know, you see, I have Tumblr blogs. On Tumblr blogs you see these IMFPNTUZ, I don't know, 4 letters, and that's supposed to tell me something about you as a personality. And that's ludicrous. It tells me nothing. All it tells me is that you're gullible. In the 1950s, 2 heart specialists decided to divide people into 2 types. People who are prone to heart disease and people who are not so prone. Basically, people who are stressed out all the time, people who are not so stressed out all the time, with the intention of drawing up a profile to help doctors treat heart disease. We call those type A and type B personalities, which are broadly interesting to heart doctors, but don't tell us anything at all about any particular individual, because you can't shove everyone into one of two boxes and expect to do anything useful with that information. Astrologers think you can divide people into 12 categories based on their dates of birth. For no good reason at all. There's a feeling among them that people born around the same time share the same traits. And even ancient people had enough information to understand that this must be bullshit. But the feeling persists. These 12 types are called the zodiac, and daily zodiac readings are called horoscopes, and they're available in most terrible newspapers. They're usually vague enough that somebody somewhere can relate to them, but they tell us nothing at all about any particular individual, because you can't shove everyone into one of 12 boxes and expect to do anything useful with that information. Briggs and Myers were a mother and daughter team in the 1940s, and they decided to divide people into 16 categories based on different permutations of how they conceptualized extroversion, thinking, judgment, introversion, intuition, feeling, etc. Because the categories are arbitrary and the tests are self-administered, it's useless. So if you see someone advertising their 4-letter Myers-Briggs personality type, it does tell you something about them, but probably not what they were intending. Because you can't shove everyone into one of 16 boxes and expect to do anything useful with that information. Our brains are pattern recognition machines. We're forever trying to connect the dots to create order out of the madness, but everything is madness. And sometimes the human condition is that our urge to create patterns is stronger than our ability to determine how useful those patterns are. The social world, composed of human minds, is such total chaos that any attempt to explain all of it using any number of personality boxes is doomed to fail. Our shared reality is one of special cases and exceptions, and any personality theory will necessarily be short on those. We're all constantly evolving our personalities through our decisions, peer validation, and how we react to what Hamlet called the 1,000 natural shocks that flesh is heir to. Basically, there's no such thing as that sort of person. Every time you think to yourself, oh, I'm not that sort of a person, or Tom isn't that sort of person, or Bob is that sort of person. Bullshit. There's no such thing as that sort of person. Which is completely against what Jordan Peterson would tend to believe. He backs up a personality test called the Ocean, because it's based on openness, conscientiousness, agreeableness, extroversion, and neuroticism. And in lots of his lectures, you hear him talk about people who are open are this, people who are conscientious are that, people who are agreeable are this, people who are neurotic are that. I took the test, not on his site because he charges for it, but I found it somewhere else. And I took the test and I got a bunch of results, and you know, they're all meaningless. It doesn't mean anything. It said it came out as that I was 75% agreeable. Now I'm sure there's a lot of people who would argue that I'm definitely nowhere near 75% agreeable. And surely they would know better than me. You have to assume that everybody is going to believe that they're more agreeable than they actually are. But how people react to you, you don't get to control that. You certainly don't get to dictate it. Unless you're Stalin. I also got a high extrovert rating on the basis of questions like, do you take over a party, and so on. Now, I'm often the most interesting, fascinating person in the room. There's not much I can do about that. But it's not something I welcome, and I don't invite it. It's just something that happens because I'm a fascinating person. Does that mean I'm extrovert just because I take over a party that I didn't want to go to? No. You know? I don't know. Jordan Peterson. I do. I like him. I like his lectures on psychological analysis of myths and legends. And I like a lot of the stuff he has to say about modern psychology as well. He's famous for saying, tidy your room. That's like one of his famous quotes, which he said to some guy who asked him, what should I do? Just what's the one thing I can do to improve my life? And he said, tidy your room. Everybody laughed, and he said, no, go tidy your room. Because you're a student. Your room is a mess, right? Yeah, go tidy your room, and this will get you in the mental place where you're organizing yourself. All about organization and method and, you know, all the 19th century stuff that led to people like Hitler and Stalin. All the grand narrative stuff. Yeah. I am going to leave you with the end of this sentence. No, here we go, sorry. I'm going to leave you with a thing I saw, which is funny. This is about a sex thing, so prepare yourself for sex information. The head title, this is a question somebody asked on a relationship advice forum. It says, not sure if I, F23, can go through with my boyfriend's M25 Jordan Peterson fantasy. My boyfriend and I like a bit of light kink mixed in with role play. Nothing too unusual, some boss secretary stuff, teacher-student stuff, that kind of thing. It's fun, maybe something we do once a week or so. Last night my boyfriend started a professor thing. That was cool with me, although he seemed a little more nervous than usual. Once we got into it, he asked me to call him Professor Peterson. A couple of days before, we'd been watching some of Jordan Peterson's videos. I hadn't really thought much about him, but my boyfriend was excited to show me. He says Dr. Peterson has been helping him figure out some stuff in his life. I watched the videos and thought some of the stuff he had to say was okay. Yeah, like take responsibility for your life. But some of it was really weird, just over-the-top alpha male stuff. Like something about not respecting men who won't fight. It just rubbed me the wrong way. Anyway, when my boyfriend brought up the Dr. Peterson thing, I knew where it was coming from. I really like to be accommodating in bed. I totally get off on it, actually. So I went through with it, but in the end I wasn't super comfortable. John has brought up every day since then. He's got some real dom fantasies that he wants to act out as Jordan Peterson. I don't know, like, should I look more into these videos and see if I can change my mind about him, or should I play along? I can tell my boyfriend is totally into it. He's normally a sex 2 or 3 times a week kind of guy, but he wants it all the time now. I'm happy he's feeling more horny and I don't want to shut him down. What should I do? Right? I don't know. Anytime that's obviously funny for reasons I'm not going to get into, it's just very funny. Anytime I say something negative about Jordan Peterson, I get a bunch of people coming at me on my Twitter saying, oh, you didn't read it properly. Like it's a religion. Really creepy stuff. You didn't read it properly. Or the classic one, and I've got it more than once from people, is you don't understand him. You don't understand him like I understand him. And I'm like, that's like something you'd say about a girlfriend who's a total bitch. You know? Like, oh, you don't know, you don't understand Courtney the way, you don't know her the way I know her. Yeah, you have to say that because you're banging her. Like, these guys aren't banging Jordan Peterson, although apparently sometimes they want to bang as Jordan Peterson. They're just, why are you talking about him like, oh, you don't know him like I know him? Dude, you're not dating him. He doesn't give a damn about you. And his whole message is resilience and make yourself strong. And you're coming at me with this weak, pathetic horse shit. Oh, you didn't read it properly. You don't know Jordan Peterson. You're like, what the hell are you talking about? He's a guy with opinions. And those opinions are either right or wrong. And we'll discuss them. That's what's going to happen. Like, I have people that I admire a lot. People like Werner Herzog and... But if somebody came out to me and said, oh, Werner Herzog is an idiot, and he said this thing, and you know, I don't like him, I'm like, okay, well, okay, yeah. Enjoy your life, you know? It doesn't bother me. I mean, I do like him. And I like what he got. Like, I like Wittgenstein. I like Ludwig Wittgenstein as a philosopher, and a lot of people don't. And they have messaged me and let me know that. But, you know, okay. I mean, anytime you criticize his ideas, you might be right. I don't know, I'll just have a read of it and see. And if it turns out you are right, well then I've learned something. Good for me, right? But this thing, this super sensitive, weak, pathetic fan club he's built up. And he doesn't seem to do anything at all to... Like, he's not taking any responsibility for it. If anything, he seems to be happy about it. How could you be happy about having so much weakness built up around you? Well, there's other people who say that he's helped them. I don't know. I will have to take their word for it. There's plenty of people who say Scientology has helped them with things like coming off drugs and curing homosexuality. Okay, maybe not that. But there's people who've said that Scientology has helped them come off drugs. And I guess we have to take their word for it. I don't see it myself, and I can't imagine Scientology doing anything for you that you couldn't have done on your own. I don't think it's a necessary element in the same way as I don't think Jordan Peterson is a necessary element of you cleaning your room. You can do that without Jordan, right? And I should hope to hell that you can have sex with your girlfriend without Jordan being involved. And that is all I have to say about Jordan Peterson. If you like this, please tell your friends. If you don't like it, please tell everybody you know. And I am out.
Not like